One question we get asked a lot about is the service level agreements within Microsoft Azure, the SLA. Now, nearly all services from API management to Windows Virtual Desktop has an associated SLA with Microsoft, typically around availability or connectivity, and normally that's somewhere above around 99.9% of that SLA. But it really varies between the different configurations of the services you take. So a really good example is virtual machines. In a virtual machine you can configure it in different ways, and one of the biggest changes to an SLA is around the attached managed disk, so where you're putting your operating system and your data on there. So if you just take a standard virtual machine from Microsoft with standard HDD disks, you only get an availability SLA or a connectivity to that VM of 95%. Whereas if you attach a premium SSD disk, Microsoft then increased that SLA availability to 99.9%. And then within the whole VM SLA capabilities, you can do something called an availability set, where you have a pair of VMs created as an availability set, and then that increases it further to 99.99%, so 4 nines. And you can see really whereby that configuration really affects the SLA, so that's something to watch out for. Now, the one mistake or one area where I see customers looking at their solution, because typically when you build on Azure and the business asks you for what's the availability of this application we've put on Azure, you're using multiple services and components. So if you've got two services like an app service and a database, and they're both 99.99%, the availability of that solution is not 99.99% because both of those services can fail. So I'm going to talk about composite or compound SLAs. So a composite or compound SLA is when you've got a combination of services within Azure that starts to create a solution level SLA. A really good example that we just discussed was a web app which comes with 99.95% availability, and that's probably writing data to a SQL database which has got a 4 nines SLA. Now, the combination of these two together, because each of those has an independent failure rate and SLA, so when you're trying to create a solution SLA or a composite SLA, you have to times those availabilities together to get an overall SLA for the solution. So you can see here the combination of failure rates of those two services actually gives a composite SLA of 99.94. So it might be lower than you originally expected. So when you're architecting solutions on Azure, you need to think about the what if scenarios. So what if this SQL database disappears or becomes unavailable and we've still got users hitting the web app? So one way to do it is to put different routes or different mitigations in place within Azure to then increase the SLA. So for this example, we could use a queue. So if the data's hitting the web app and it's trying to write to SQL database and that's not available, we could use a queuing service which has an SLA of 99.9%. So let me show here that it actually increases the solution SLA above the individual components. So what you do is basically work out the failure rates of the database and the queue service to give you a new SLA for this tier, because what is the availability that one of these services is always available. So actually when you times those two failure rates together, you get like a 7 nines availability for this tier here versus the application tier. So then you just rerun that same calculation but with a new SLA for that tier. So you can see you're taking the apps service and then the availability of this tier that both services are going to be available, and you end up with a 99.95% availability composite SLA. So architecting solutions and applications on Azure is really important, and also working out the composite SLA so you can go back to the business with a level of certainty backed by Microsoft's kind of legally obliged services, that you've got the surety that you've built an application that delivers the availability and SLA that the business expects.